All right, here we are rolling right into week 4. Hope everything's going splendid. We've got another typical week ahead of us with 2 thought primers, one due on Thursday, one due on Sunday. And I'm just going to give you a heads up that I think these 2 thought primers are the most difficult of the course. Okay, so I'm telling this because I want you to be patient with yourself as you're working on these thought primers. I want you to slow down, and anytime you feel overwhelmed or confused, remind yourself, oh yeah, he said in the weekly announcement video that this was a normal response to having to deal with these 2 thought primers. These 2 thought primers are not difficult because they're especially complex or they involve a lot of work. They're difficult simply because they're going to be presenting you a lot of new terminology and a lot of new concepts that are going to sound funny and are going to be concepts that you haven't thought about before. And so just remind yourself that anytime you're encountering something new and unfamiliar, it's always going to produce a certain amount of anxiety in you. And so the way to deal with that is to just slow way down and go step by step by step. Thought primer number 5 is going to introduce you to 3 operations: conversion, obversion, and contrapositions. These are 3 operations that we can apply to standard form categorical statements to create new standard form categorical statements that have the same meaning as the original standard form categorical statements, even though they look different. Okay, so as long as we apply these operations correctly, we're going to produce new standard form categorical statements that have the same meaning and the same truth value as the original statements. Now, as you're working through thought primer number 5, it's perfectly okay to just think about these operations very mechanically. Here are the steps of conversion. Here are the steps of obversion and contraposition. That's a perfectly appropriate way to begin. And what would make that really easy for you is to make sure you have your chapter 2.13, 14, and 15 summary handout with you, because that handout boils down all of the steps that are associated with these 3 operations: conversion, obversion, and contraposition. And so if you have that handout with you as you're watching your video lectures, you can be taking notes right on that handout, and then have that handout with you as you're working on your homework problems. Okay, so as you're beginning, yes, think about these operations very mechanically, but also I really encourage you to try to understand why these operations work in the way that they do. Ask yourself questions like this. Why is it that when I apply the operation conversion to a given E statement or I statement, does it create a new statement that looks different but means the same thing as the original? And why is it that when I apply contraposition to a given A statement or O statement, the new statement looks different, but means the same thing and has the same truth value as the original? And why is it that when I try to apply conversion to an A statement or O statement, why do those new statements not mean the same thing as the original? Okay, so you want to try to understand as much as you can why these operations work in the way that they do, and that'll make it really easy, much easier for you going down the road. And in a couple of weeks, trust me, these operations are going to seem second nature. Okay, so again, they're going to be unfamiliar, a little confusing at first, but going down the road, you're going to get much more comfortable with them. Now, thought primer number 6, I think is actually harder than thought primer number 5. Thought primer number 6 is going to introduce you to the traditional square of opposition. So we're familiar with the modern square of opposition that gives us the rule of contradiction. Not a whole lot of information comes from the modern square of opposition because all of those other relationships, aside from contradictory statements, are logically undetermined. But the traditional square of opposition is going to work from a different set of assumptions, and it's going to have a lot more information. The traditional square of opposition is going to give us a lot more rules, again, that are going to have kind of funny names, and we might not be familiar with them. We're not going to be familiar with them. But again, give yourself some slack here. Be patient with yourself, step by step by step. Make sure as you're working on thought primer number 6 that you have your 2.16, 17, and 18 chapter summary with you. So again, you can be taking notes on that and then using that handout, which I think is especially helpful when you're working on your homework problems. Now, in thought primer number 6, there's the instructor corrected problems. There's something new that we haven't done yet, and it's in part 2. Part 2, number 1 of thought primer number 6 asks you this: in your opinion, is the following statement true or false? And the statement is this: no video games are things that cause people to behave violently in real life. So what I'm asking you in part 2, number 1 of the instructor corrected problems is that statement a true statement or is it a false statement? And I want you to briefly defend your answer. Okay, that doesn't mean you write an essay. It just means you write a short paragraph. You write more than something like, well, I've never behaved violently in real life, and I play video games. That's not terribly compelling. You want to think about what kinds of evidence or reason or justification that you can provide in support of your judgment of this statement about video games being either true or false. Okay, so maybe a short paragraph. Part 2, number 2, asks you to use the statement in number 1, no video games are things that cause people to behave violently in real life, and your determination of that statement being true or false to create an immediate inference, the kinds of arguments we've been looking at that have exactly one premise that leads immediately to a conclusion. Now, how to create an immediate inference is covered in this short video here in thought primer number 6 at the very bottom. Okay, so in this video, I will explain to you and I'll give you an example of how exactly you go about creating an immediate inference. You want to make sure you watch that video because you don't want to make the mistake of being that person who emails me and says, how do you create an immediate inference? Do you have any videos on that? Okay, so that just tells me like, oh, you're not watching your weekly announcement video and you're not looking carefully at your thought primers, okay? So if you get stuck though in creating your immediate inference after watching the video explaining how to create one, no worries. Send me an example of something that you think could be an immediate inference via email, and I'll take a look at it. And maybe I say like, yeah, that totally works, rock it. Or maybe I'll say like, okay, that one doesn't quite work, but what about if you did this? And we can make sure that we get you to the point where when you submit your work, you've got a bomber immediate inference included in there that's going to be great. All right, so if anything comes up this week, just make sure that you send me an email and get in touch with me. Let me know what's going on. And again, be patient with yourself this week.